And he said, well, maybe you've heard of him. He was pretty high up in the bureau. His name's Mark Felt. And I looked at him and I was in shock. In shock. I'd known this young man for 2 years, and I didn't know who his grandfather was. And it turned out to be the guy that I'd spent so much time looking for 25 years earlier. And I said, Nick, did you know your grandfather's deep throat? And he said, what? Really? He's deep throat? He said, he's always denied it. He said, now we've had some hints lately that it might be him. Really? He's deep throat? I said, yeah, he's deep throat. I said, listen, let me come up, ask your mother if I can come up and talk to him. And I think I know why he's not talking. And I think I can talk him into coming out and telling his story, because I think it's real important that people know what a hero he is. And in my view, because he was with the FBI, what he had done was he had helped the FBI to do its job. By working with Woodward, he gave the public enough interest in the story so that the investigation could not be swept under the rug. So I thought, again, he had really cured our system, and I wanted to tell him that. And I thought if I talked to him about it, he would not be ashamed of what he had done. Because he always thought, I think it looked bad, an FBI agent going to a garage and talking to a reporter. It just wasn't. He wanted the FBI's image to be spiffy clean. So I went up to talk to him about this. And when I first mentioned to him, I sat down and I said, he was introduced by the family. Oh, this is John O'Connor. He's our friend. He'd love to talk to you. And I said, and I talked to him about all the FBI people I knew, and my father was an FBI agent, and I was a prosecutor. And he went, oh, yeah, that's great, that's great. You could tell he thought I was a law enforcement kind of guy. And then I said, you know, I'd love to talk to you about this fellow Deep Throat. And when I did that, here's this nice old man. He's 89, I think, at the time. He's sitting in his easy chair. He grabbed his chair and he went like this. And I could see his knuckles actually got white. He was just grabbing onto it like this. And then I started talking about how I thought Deep Throat was a hero, because he had cleansed our system. He kept it free of corruption. That all the young prosecutors and young FBI agents thought this fellow was a great guy, this Deep Throat. And when I did that, he looked at me and I could just see his eyes. His eyes were melting almost. I was giving him absolution. I was telling him that a guy in my position who was hanging out with prosecutors and FBI agents thought he did okay. Those were the kind of people that he was ashamed of telling. He didn't want to tell a law enforcement person that he had been going to a garage. He knew that most normal citizens thought Deep Throat was a good guy. And then I switched from third person to second person. I was talking about Deep Throat in the third person. He did this, he did that. And then I said, so you should come out and you should tell people who you are. And he didn't correct me. He's sitting there like that. And then after we finished talking, he said, well, I'll think about what you said and I'll talk to you later about it. Thank you very much. And he didn't know quite what to do. So it took some weeks before he finally admitted to me and the family that he was Deep Throat. And then he wanted us all to keep it a secret. And then we talked some more, and he told me that I could go out and find a publisher, that it might be a good thing for him to do this. And the family wanted him to do it. He said, well, if it's good for the family, then I'll do it. And he was ambivalent about it. But we had trouble getting the story published because he couldn't remember details. So he was an older guy, so some publications thought he was just a doddering old man who didn't know. He knew he was Deep Throat, but he couldn't tell you where the garage was or anything like that. So we had trouble getting a story published, and it took me 3 years to get a story published. And finally, Vanity Fair came out with the story in, I'm going to say, May of 2005. I first met Mark in April of 2002. 3 years and 1 month later, we got the story published. And I didn't know. Vanity Fair calls up. I wrote the story and knew it was going to come out. And Vanity Fair calls me the week before and says, okay, John, now when are you coming out to New York? I said, you want me out to New York? What for? I said, well, there may be some press inquiries. Is it press inquiries? I mean, just going to write the article. People are going to read it, right? Well, they said some press may be interested in this. I said, okay, so I'll be out there. When do you want me out there? So, go in the morning, it's coming out. I go into the offices. They put me in a conference room. It's got a little TV there, and TV's on. And, I'm watching President Bush in a press conference, and he's answering questions and so forth about some topic. And right then, somebody says, "We're going to interrupt this program. There's a breaking story. Vanity Fair has just announced who Deep Throat is. It's Mark Felt, the former #2 man at the FBI. We're now going to interview his lawyer, John O'Connor, who's standing by." And I'm saying, and this is how I knew that maybe this was going to be bigger than I thought it was. So a young lady comes in with the phone and puts it on the desk and says, "Okay, John, now so-and-so from ABC's on the line now. Could you talk to them?" So I picked up the phone, and then I heard myself on the TV giving stupid answers. Anyway, that started something. It was a lot of fun. It really caught everybody's attention. And as a result, my client really ended up, he was always very ambivalent about it. But I think when the public reacted to it, I want to say 80% of the population in the first poll thought that Deep Throat was a hero. And 11% said he was not a hero, and the 9% were undecided. And so somebody asked me about that, and I said, look, I said, 20% of the people in this country think Elvis is alive. Okay, so if only 11% of the people think that he's not a hero, well, that's fine for me. So he really was well received by the public, and then because of this, it was kind of fun. I wrote a book on this, and then we just finished a movie that it's getting shown more in art houses around. It's a very good movie with Liam Neeson. Do you know who Liam Neeson is? Did the Taken movies. Diane Lane. Do you know who Diane Lane is? Have you seen Diane Lane? Micah Monroe. It's got a real good cast. Real good cast. It's a nice movie. You'll probably see it mainly on Netflix, but it's kind of fun, and I'd recommend you see it because it gives you one side of Watergate. All the President's Men talks about Watergate from the point of view of the newspaper reporters excitedly covering this, and our story is about from the inside out, what it's like to be an FBI agent when something like this happens. Let me give you the background about this for purposes of government, the way that our government's organized. When the Department of Justice started, they needed to investigate crimes, and so they had a Bureau of Investigation. And unfortunately, when the Bureau of Investigation investigated crimes back in the early 20th century, they were very corrupt, because somebody would be in office. If one party was in office, the other side got investigated, and their side could get away with murder. And this happened both ways. And everybody agreed that was unacceptable. And so Congress got together and tried to give the FBI some measure of independence. They issued founding documents saying the Bureau should be independent. And then come 1924, they appointed the first director, J. Edgar Hoover, who was the director for 48 years. And then he died in 1972. He was the only director of the FBI. In that time, in that 48 years, he tried as best he could to keep, he's kind of a gruff, tough guy. He tried to keep the Bureau independent as he could. Now, come May of 1972, he dies of a heart attack. My client, Mark Felt, had been his #2 man, and was thought that he was going to be the successor to Hoover. So he was a great guy, They did a TV series modeled after Mark Felt called The FBI, and it was a hit show for maybe 5 years. He was the advisor to it. Everybody thought he was going to be the next head of the FBI, but but unfortunately, he crossed the Nixon administration. There was a protest against the Vietnam War on May Day, one year on May 1st. Thousands of kids went to Washington to protest the war. Nixon wanted them all locked up. And so he asked Mark Felt to arrest thousands of people, thousands of young kids. And Mark Felt said, "There's one problem, Mr. President. They haven't committed a crime. I'm not going to arrest them." So the president was a little ticked off at that, had the police chief arrest them in Washington, and they had thousands of kids get sent to a makeshift jail, which was the Washington Redskins practice field. They put a chain link fence around it. There were no bathroom facilities or showers, and they just dumped a bunch of kids in there. And it was terrible, squalid, and, you know, it was nasty. Finally, after a day or so, they let them all loose, but it was really a bad chapter in the history of civil rights. And Mark Felt was very upset about that, but the Nixon administration was very upset with him. So when it came time to replace Hoover, President Nixon named a guy who was very much of a political ally of President to be the head of the FBI. So when the burglary happens, this is the first test of the FBI's independence. Okay, and that's made was a big thing with Mark Felt. Would the Bureau continue to be fair and independent? Let me go through and talk a little bit about our system of government. Is it a good thing, would you all think, to be able to keep our representatives accountable? That is to say, know what elected officials were doing so that you can judge them and either vote them out of office or do whatever. Do we think that's a good idea? Openness, accountability? All right. What is it? And I'm going to ask you all a question here now. How is our system designed to assure that the people who elect our representatives are kept informed? What in our system helps us to hold them accountable and lets us know what they're doing? What would you say?
Media?
Now I had the same issue with the last class until I started bribing them. Okay. Now what I've got some cards here. All right. If you give me a good answer to a question, I'm going to give you a card. Then you can give that to Mr. Jordan, and then you will get a book sent to you. Okay, an autographed book, which will, you know, it costs you $15. Right there. There's the book. We just made a movie of it. It's got Liam Neeson's picture on the front, and I'll sign it. And it costs you $16 now, but once I sign it, the value will be about $2.50. Okay, I'll ruin it. I'll ruin it. Then you put it on eBay. You can sell it for maybe $2 and pay them $1.50. So it's worth something. All right, now that I've got your attention, I might bribe you. All right, what is there in our system that ensures openness and accountability, some sunshine into our system? Can anybody tell me that? There you go.
Checks and balances.
That's checks and balances. What specifically, what check and balance is there in our system that helps inform the public, helps protect openness, and helps see to it that you all receive information about our government? What do you think? Anybody? All right, we're going to go one more time. Oh, here we go.
There's one there.
Freedom of the press.
There you go. See how easy this is? She gets a book. See? Freedom of the press. All right. Anybody? There you are. There you are. Anybody tell me, is that embodied in any law or statute or document? Right there.
First Amendment bill.
See, there you go. See, this is real easy, isn't it? Good, good. All right. Now, is there any, okay, so openness is good. It's good to have stuff published. Is there any part of our government that should be secret? What part of our government processes should be kept secret? We talk about openness, publishing things. Is there any part of it that should be kept secret? Maybe there shouldn't be any. Shouldn't everything come out in the public?
Nothing should be a secret.
Nothing should be a secret. You've kind of got the nothing position. Okay. Anybody take the something position? Okay, Laker, Kobe Bryant back there.
Like strategies to deal with belligerent countries.
Well, that's right. That's national security. You're right. National security should be kept confidential. So it wasn't the answer I'm looking for, but it's actually a correct answer. National security should be kept confidential. You're right. Good, 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 good. All right. All right. Anybody else? Anything else? National security should be kept confidential. What do you think? Anybody? There you go.
Ongoing investigations.
You've been sitting over there with this and you just sort of kept your light under a bushel. Here we go. That's right. That's right. Ongoing investigations. Here, can we get to that? There you are. Okay. You know, why do we want to keep ongoing investigations confidential, or at least the information confidential? Is anybody, well, what do you think? Why would we want to do? Why wouldn't we want to tell everybody what's going on in a criminal investigation? Anything? Yeah.
Because the law wants it to be kept just to the detectives.
Once what you say?
The information should just be kept to the detectives, like in the meantime.
It should be, and tell me, and why do you think that should be?
So like things can't be like tampered with.
That's a good point. You can't tamper. You don't know what the witnesses are going to say. You can't tamper. You can't tamper with the witness, tamper with the evidence. Pretty good. Also, it's probably a good idea that we don't want people slandered, right? If it turns out somebody makes a false accusation about you, you don't want that on the evening news if it turns out not to be true, right? Fair enough? Okay. So, is there, you know, we've talked about, you know, we elect our representatives to come in and do something that maybe the other party doesn't want done. And that's why we have elections, we have fights. Is there anything that shouldn't change depending upon who's in office? Are there some things that it should make a difference who gets elected? What of our government should stay the same all the time? Anybody, any thoughts on that? You're designing a government. You guys are in government class. Let's design a government. Why, do you want anything to stay the same, or do you want everything to change from one administration to the next? What do you think? Okay.
I got one over here.
Oh, there you go. What?
I think that the judiciary branch should stay the same, because then you have like the same Supreme Court justices like speculating on different laws and things, so you have the same like outlook.
Pretty darn good. You're right on the right track. Also, should we keep the way we investigate crime? Should that be the same? Should it make a difference who's in office as to whether you're guilty or innocent of a crime? Should that make a difference? Yeah. Right. So now you can see the issue here. Now we've got to keep crimes in criminal investigations confidential. But then the public, you want the public to have a right to know something. Okay? What happens if it turns out the very people at the top of the pyramid of power are doing something wrong and they control the justice system? Is that a problem? Do you think that's an issue? Right? So that's really what Watergate's about. Is about what do you do, what does a person do in government who finds that certain crimes are being swept under the rug. So let's talk about Mark Felt's FBI investigation. Everybody knew about the burglary, okay? Everybody knew about the burglary. So you could shine a light on the burglary, but that itself wasn't going to get the people worked up. What the FBI found in its investigation was that besides the burglary wasn't just sort of a one-off, kind of a strange little occurrence. but it was part of an overall campaign of spying and sabotage. Okay, that's what the Washington Post reporting did. It put it in a larger context. And once you see that in its larger context, then you can see that the burglary really meant something. And also, there are other crimes, those should be prosecuted too. But when we come to September of 1972, all the people in this country knew about were that there was a burglary and that 7 people had been indicted for it. They didn't know about any other crimes. You know, Mark Felt has a dilemma. He knows that there are all these other crimes that they have investigated and could prove, and that also had a bearing on the burglary. Because if all these other crimes have occurred that are very much related, and they were authorized by higher officials, maybe the burglary was authorized by higher officials too. Doesn't that make sense? You know, if there are 7 events that are authorized by a higher up, and then an 8th that is somewhat similar, can't you conclude circumstantially that maybe that was authorized? That was the situation here. However, people couldn't know that if they didn't know about the 7 other crimes, right? They didn't know about all the associated crimes. Now, some of the crimes the FBI uncovered in its investigation of spying and sabotage, some of them are actually kind of funny. They're kind of minor. Some of them were more serious. Let me tell you about some of the minor ones. What would happen is, when both the Republicans and the Democrats were having their primaries, the Republicans had a whole team of what they call dirty tricksters. They'd go out and pull tricks on the other side. Like, let me give you an example. Say some Democrats would be campaigning, and in the old days you used to put your shoes outside the door in a hotel, and the hotel would come around and shine them. You know that? That's pretty cool. You just, next morning, you open the door, your shoes would be there all nice and shiny. Male, female, they'd fix them up for you, really do a nice job. Well, what the dirty tricksters did is they would go and they'd pick up everybody's shoes and throw them down the trash chute. So people would get up in the morning, the guy would put his suit on, get ready to go out to get his shoes. They're not there. And so all these campaign workers are going out without any shoes on, trying to figure out what was going on, and then somebody would find them, you know, down in the trash chute, and they'd be all dusty. And those guys, or they'd order 300 pizzas delivered to the campaign. You know, so people would be working on all their stuff, and you know, here we come, 300 pizzas. Or, you know, things like that. They changed the times of the campaign rallies. So somebody would plan a campaign rally for 8 o'clock. Well, they would go down and tear all the signs and have the campaign start at 10 o'clock. So, you know, people would be ready for the rally and nobody would show up. So some of it's kind of funny. Some of it got really pretty bad. I don't know if you ever heard of a senator from Maine named Edmund Muskie. And Edmund Muskie, it looked like he was going to beat Nixon in the 1972 election. He was a conservative Democrat, very much middle of the road, looked like he really had enough to beat Nixon, and he was the guy that Nixon feared. Well, at some point, all this stuff kind of came out, all these funny stories about Senator Muskie, and finally he broke down crying one day. And I think it might even been here in Maine, or in New Hampshire, in the snow. He broke down crying, and everybody said, "Oh well, Muskie's through," and his campaign kind of imploded. There had been an article published about his wife being a drunk. There had been another letter sent around to newspapers in which supposedly Muskie, the Muskie campaign had made a slur on French Canadians. The Canuck letter is what they called it, and it hurt him in New Hampshire because there are a lot of French Canadians there. Anyway, all this stuff really actually damaged Muskie's campaign, and he ended up dropping out. And a very weak candidate, George McGovern, got nominated. So some of the dirty tricks they did were really very important. And they sabotaged people. They sabotaged some Republicans too. There's a guy in the Bay Area that was a pretty good candidate that got sabotaged. So Mark Felt knew all this, but so he's in a situation where he knows all this, thinks the public should know the story, but doesn't quite know how to do it. Now, we've said before, you shouldn't give things to the press out of your files, right? We all agree with that. You shouldn't just come out with confidential stuff. You want to get your story in the public. How can you do it? Can anybody tell me how you can possibly get a story out without giving the reporter information from your confidential files? This is one, you get a card for this, and you can figure out how to do it. Yeah.
Give them a clue. Follow the money.
You know, I gotta give you a card for that. Gotta give you a card, and I gotta give them a clue is probably a good idea too. If you pass that card down. All right, all right.
Last minute.
All right, all right. Well, give them a clue is a great idea. Follow the money is a good idea. What he would do is rather than tell them the story that witnesses had said, he would push the reporters to witnesses. Okay? Now, the reporters then would go out and get all this detail. Now, in order for the country to really understand Watergate and to really get it out as to why Watergate shouldn't be swept under the rug, what do you need to tell the public? What is it that they need? What do they need to get in order to become engaged in Watergate? What would you say? Yeah.
Well, they need to see that it's significant. They need to see that it affects them in some way.
The what you say?
They need to think that the event is significant, that it might affect them or the country at large.
Okay. And okay. And how would you do that? How would you show the significance?
Well, you'd have to effectively counter any arguments that were made to the contrary, because at the time I understand there were quite a number of arguments.
And how would you do that? How would you, when you, let me ask you this. I think what you're saying is you would need to put things into a coherent context, right?
Yeah.
Okay, right. And so what Mark Felt was doing in the garage was exactly what this young man said. After sending the reporters out to talk to witnesses, he was trying to teach Woodward how to put things in a coherent context. He was giving him the story. We all understand things by stories. Before we had printing, before we had literature, we had an oral tradition in which people would pass down stories from generation to generation orally. That's because every story has a what? There is a blank to every story.
Meaning.
Who said moral? Who said moral? I think you did, didn't you? You already have a card. How about this one next? You repeated it. You repeated
I really didn't.
Okay. Hey. All right. All right. All right. So that's what he was doing, is he was putting things in a narrative context. Once he did that, now the reporters could take all this detail and they knew how to put it together. Now by the time things went on television and we had people testifying, everybody saw what happened, everybody could see the significance of the crimes, and also there became a saying, the crime's not as bad as the, who said cover-up? All right, there you are. The crime's not as bad as the cover-up, and this is what's happening today. When you see General Flynn today, I think, got indicted. I'm told this. General Flynn got indicted today for lying to the FBI. You'll find most of these investigations, the first pieces that fall, people have guilt and they lie. And so what happened in Watergate is, in order to cover up this little burglary, people started lying. And then everything fell apart because you started being able to pierce the lies. You'll see probably more indictments out of Washington now that General Flynn is in. Now he's going to talk about things and maybe the next person's going to fall, and maybe they'll get to the truth here. We'll see. We'll see what the truth is. I don't know what it is yet. I don't know what's happened on the collusion, but at least we'll start finding out what's true. And so that's what happened in Watergate. I should tell you that back when I might have told you that I was going to, after I figured out who Deep Throat was, I decided I was going to go get a job in the private sector. I gave all my cases, my criminal cases that I had, to a young prosecutor in our office named Robert Mueller. Have you ever heard of him? Okay. Who's Robert Mueller?
Head of the Russian.
Well, okay, you said it before he did. Oregon was polite. He was going to wait until I called him. You just blurted it out. So yes. Okay, all right. But anyway, that's really, so what we're going to see is, today, I think Mark Twain said, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. A lot of what is happening today also happened during Watergate. But what happened is, I think the result was, we now have a culture where people, where you more likely to get a special prosecutor today, like Robert Mueller. I think there's much more awareness on the part of the public that we do not want to allow public officials to lie to us. So I think Watergate did a lot of good for us. And I think a lot of it is the result of Mark Felt being ethical. He helped out a newspaper reporter. He tried to do it in the most ethical way. He would never, by the way, leak national security information like some of these guys do that just talk about our country's secrets. He would think that's terrible. So not all leaking is good, and I'm not here to tell you all leaking is good. But certainly, if there's an ethical problem and there's an ethical solution to solve that ethical problem, I think our culture has been improved by Watergate and improved by Mark Felt.